Beatrice lived in the humble and quiet village of Zuba, a place surrounded by lush green fields and dusty roads that came alive with the chatter of people. Her home was a small clay house with a thatched roof, but inside, it was always filled with warmth and the delicious smell of freshly baked bread. Every morning, before the sun rose, Beatrice would wake up to prepare her bread. She mixed flour, sugar, and other ingredients in her big wooden bowl, humming softly as she walked. Her hands moved quickly, kneading the dough with care and love. Today's bread must be even better than yesterday's, she whispered to herself. Once the dough was ready, she placed it into her clay oven, carefully watching the flames. The sweet aroma of baking bread soon filled the air, seeping out into the village and waking a few neighbors. By the time the sun began to rise, Beatrice was out on the streets, balancing a wide wooden tray full of hot, golden brown loaves on her head. Fresh bread. Sweet and soft bread, she called as she walked through the market, her cheerful voice echoing through the stalls. The villagers adored her bread. Mothers would buy it for their children, fathers would bring some home for their wives, and children would spend their pocket money just to taste the soft, fluffy treat. Some people would even spend their very last penny on it. "Beatrice, your bread is magical," one old woman exclaimed, biting into a warm loaf. Whenever Beatrice stepped into the bustling market of Zuba, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The chatter of traders calling out their goods and the laughter of children all quieted as people turned to watch her. Balancing her tray of freshly baked bread on her head with ease, she moved gracefully through the crowd. Fresh bread. Sweet bread. Come and taste by. Beatrice called, her voice warm and inviting. It wasn't just her bread that drew people, it was Beatrice herself. Her radiant smile lit up her face, and her cheerful greeting made everyone feel special. "You're welcome," she would say to every buyer with a warm grin, and when they were done, she'd add, "Thank you for your patronage." Her words were simple, yet they left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Other bread sellers in the market often watched in frustration as their stalls stayed empty whenever Beatrice was around. No one could resist her bread or her kindness. "I don't understand," one seller muttered under her breath. "What's so special about her bread?" "It's not just the bread," another replied. "It's her. The way she treats people. You can't compete with that kind of warmth." The next day, the market was as lively as ever. Vendors were shouting to advertise their goods, vegetables, spices, and household items, but as soon as Beatrice arrived with her tray of freshly baked bread, the market seemed to shift. "Beatrice. Over here," a woman called. "Let me have 2 loaves, please," another customer shouted from across the road. Beatrice smiled warmly at each buyer, her gentle voice ringing out, "You're welcome. Thank you for your patronage." The crowd around her grew larger as people eagerly tried to get their hands on her bread. Meanwhile, the other bread sellers stood idly by, their trays untouched. One of them, a stout woman named Madame Ike, couldn't hold back her frustration any longer. "I've been here since morning, and not one of you has bought from me," she shouted angrily. "Am I invisible? Or do you all think I'm a ghost?" Another seller, a younger man named Sonny, joined in, raising his voice. "Please, come and buy my bread. It's just as good as hers, if not better." But their cries went unnoticed. The villagers were too focused on Beatrice. Her bread, her smile, and the warmth she carried made her irresistible. Beatrice, as usual, remained calm even as the complaints of the other sellers reached her ears. She didn't respond, only continuing to sell her bread with kindness and grace. "Please give me that last one," a woman in the crowd begged. "My husband loves your bread, and I don't want to go home without it." Beatrice handed over the final loaf, smiling as she said, "Thank you so much, and may your husband enjoy it." With her tray now empty, Beatrice began the walk home along the dusty market road, a soft smile on her face. She felt the same satisfaction she always did when she sold all her bread. Her customers were happy, and that was what mattered most to her. One evening, as Beatrice sat in her bakery watching the last rays of sunlight fade, an ambitious thought took root in her mind. If only I could attract even more customers, she whispered to herself. Her success was undeniable, but the desire to become the most successful baker in the entire region lingered heavily in her heart. This could be my chance to achieve greatness, she muttered. By nightfall, her mind was made up. She decided to seek the help of Udili, the herbalist who lived on the outskirts of Zuba. Udili was known for his mysterious ways, and while some villagers whispered about his powers, others avoided him entirely. But Beatrice was determined. The path to Udili's hut was dark and eerie, with tall trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. When she arrived, the old man was sitting by a dimly lit fire, grinding herbs with a gnarled hand. "What brings you here, Beatrice?" Udili asked, his voice low and raspy. "I want more customers," Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want my bread to be irresistible, so much that no one will ever buy from anyone else." Udili studied her for a moment before nodding. He shuffled to a shelf filled with strange bottles and powders, pulling out a small pouch. "Add this to your bread," he said, handing her the pouch. "But remember, the bread must not see the next day. It must all be consumed before sunrise, or there will be consequences." Beatrice hesitated but eventually nodded. She thanked Udili and hurried back home, clutching the pouch tightly. The next morning, she baked her bread as usual, adding a pinch of the substance to each batch. As expected, customers flocked to her bakery, eagerly buying every loaf. Business was booming, and Beatrice felt unstoppable. But one fateful day, a customer named Bola, who usually bought bread in large quantities from Beatrice's bakery to supply to her own customers, came to make her usual purchase. Bola loaded her basket with several loaves of bread and left with a smile, as she always did. However, shortly after returning home, Bola began to feel unwell. Her head spun, and her body grew weak. Unable to carry out her usual rounds, she had no choice but to stay in bed, leaving the bread untouched and unsold. The loaf sat in her home, untouched as the hours turned into the next day. Unbeknownst to Bola, this violated Udili's strict warning: the bread must be consumed on the day it was baked. A sense of unease began to creep into Beatrice's heart when she heard that Bola hadn't delivered the bread as planned. Deep down, Beatrice feared the consequences of what was to come. The following morning, calamity struck. Customers who had eaten Beatrice's bread began complaining of swollen legs and hands. Panic spread through Zuba like wildfire. "Something is wrong with Beatrice's bread," one villager cried. "I've never seen anything like this before," another added, showing their swollen fingers. The market was in chaos, and the villagers were desperate for answers. When the swelling in their hands and legs didn't go away, they decided to take the matter to the king, Odebola. The king was known for his wisdom and fair judgment. Though he had heard about Beatrice's famous bread, he had never tasted it himself. The villagers gathered at Odebola's palace, their voices loud with anger and frustration. "Your Highness, Beatrice's bread has cursed us," one man exclaimed, raising his swollen hand as proof. Another woman added, "She must answer for what she has done. We can't sit back and let this continue." Odebola raised his hand, signaling for silence. His deep voice carried authority as he said, "Send for Beatrice at once. She must explain herself." When Beatrice arrived at the palace, her once confident demeanor was gone. Her head hung low, and her heart pounded with fear. The villagers stared at her with accusing eyes, their murmurs growing louder. "Beatrice," Odebola began, his tone stern but calm, "the people of Zuba have brought a serious accusation against you. They say your bread has caused harm. What do you have to say for yourself? Beatrice fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Your Highness, I will confess. It's true. I went to Udili, the herbalist, for help to make my bread more desirable. He gave me a substance to add, but he warned me that the bread must not last beyond a day. I didn't listen, and now this has happened. Gasps filled the air as the villagers heard her confession. Odebola's face darkened with anger and disappointment. You let greed blind you, Beatrice, he said. You put the lives of our people at risk for your own gain. And Udili, he used his dark practices to assist you in your selfish ambition. This cannot go unpunished. Odebola stood, his staff in hand, and declared, from this day forward, Beatrice and Udili are banished from the land of Zuba. Neither of you shall step foot in this community again, or you will face the full wrath of our laws. The villagers cheered at the chief's decision, though some looked at Beatrice with a mix of pity and anger. As the guards escorted her out of the palace, Beatrice looked back at the faces of the villagers she had once served so joyfully. Her heart was heavy with regret, knowing she had brought this upon herself. Now banished from the only home she had ever known, Beatrice walked away, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Her ambition had destroyed everything she built, and her journey into the unknown had just begun. Beatrice walked away from Zuba with nothing but regret and the clothes on her back. The lively streets, the laughter of children calling her name, and the sweet aroma of her bread in the air, all of it was gone. She had lost everything, not because of bad luck, but because of her own choices. For weeks, she wandered aimlessly, sleeping wherever night found her. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and she longed for the warmth of her old life. But deep inside, she knew she had no one to blame but herself. She had let her greed and pride push her too far, and now she was paying the price. One day, Beatrice stumbled upon a small, quiet village where no one knew her story. The people there were kind and didn't ask many questions. They gave her a place to stay and food to eat. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. She decided to start baking again, but this time she did it differently. No shortcuts, no tricks, just honest work. She poured her heart into every loaf, working late into the night and waking up early to make sure her bread was perfect. It wasn't easy, but she found a strange kind of peace in the hard work. Beatrice didn't return to Zuba, though. She knew her place was here, in this new village where she could start over. Over time, she became a respected baker once again, not because of tricks or fame, but because of her honesty and hard work. Her story became a lesson for others, that chasing success at any cost can destroy you, but redemption is possible if you're willing to change and face your mistakes. Beatrice never forgot Zuba, and every loaf of bread she baked was a silent promise, to herself and to the people she had once hurt, that she would never let ambition cloud her heart again. This is the end of the story. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to get more updates from proper Folktale Chronicles. In here we offer the best, and also stay tuned for the engaging video of this episode. Don't forget to like, comment, share with your friends and family. Bye for now.